Now, the interesting thing is at the same time 9 Turks who were beating up Israeli soldiers with iron bars and knives were shot in self-defense. At the same time, about 100 Muslims were massacred in Lahore. Doesn't make the front page. So it's not about people dying. It's about when Americans or Israelis kill anybody, then it's murder. Anybody else kills anybody, it's just the way of the world. So there's a very strong instinctive anti-American, anti-Israel bias. And it's just there. I mean, when I look at the civil war in Sri Lanka, 70,000 people were killed, and everybody keeps worrying about the Palestinians. When the Sri Lankan army was pushing the Tamil Tigers and massacring thousands of people, the world barely took notice, right? But if Israel builds a wall, then it's genocide. Israel wants to get out of Gaza. It's called apartheid. This is crazy. The Gazans say, get out. Israel gets out. Apartheid. It's like, yeah, apart is what you wanted. You wanted apart. So yeah, it is apartness, which is what apartheid means, but I thought that's what you wanted. Well, all you have to now say, throw the word apartheid out. And the whole world starts to go into a tizzy. But this is just because the default anti-Israel, anti-American bias in, mostly Western Europe, by the way. Not so much Eastern Europe. Not as much Eastern Europe, it's mostly Western Europe. Yeah, thank you very much. To see this as an Israel blockade issue is just a profound misperception. And my last point is this is a fabricated event with a much, much more complex background and having to do with Turkish foreign policy, which includes the moves they want to make in the next 10, 50 years, I think, to become a world power. I mean, as our country declines, which is the plan, China, India will ascend. And the question is who's going to ascend in Europe, Middle East. None of the European powers are making any claim to ascendance. They're all, in a way, retreating. So the question is, it's going to be somebody else there. I think Turkey sees the vacuum coming. I mean, to put things kind of grossly and bluntly, I think it's part of this is a response to the vacuum created by the American retreat. The difference would be this was not a blockade into Britain. This is a blockade into a British protectorate where there was a likely Jewish state. So let's put it differently. England's at war, okay, and there's a tiny little enclave of Germans on one of the islands, one of the North Sea islands. And the Germans want to get in there so they can unload weapons to attack Britain. And Britain sets up a blockade and says, you can't come in here. Okay? Now that would be the perfect analogy, right? Would Britain... Yeah, meaning there's an enclave of Germans who will accept German armaments to destroy Britain. That's the analogy, because this is an enclave of Palestinians who want weapons in to destroy Israel. Israel doesn't want weapons in. No, so we have navy, we have blockade, we have ships. So for many people, those 3 elements are enough. Forget the other 15 elements. 3 are enough to create an analogy. And again, that's just, I've heard it before, and I thought to myself, well, yeah, if you can't think of 15 things, only can think of 3 things, then it's an analogy. But people are buying it, mostly because people don't think well and don't want to think well. They want to arrive at the conclusion Israel is immoral. They want to arrive there. There's no desire to actually fill an analogy out in all its particulars. The Jews, it really is a convenient way to keep power politics running. I mean, there might be some real dyed-in-the-wool, anti-Semite theological things. I think Hitler had some of that. But I think as I look at the world today, I truly believe at some level, aside from the passions that are inflamed, it's pretty realpolitik and cynical. Meaning they know in the Arab world they have to keep the hatred of Israel alive to keep people wrapped up with the common enemy. Because the minute you don't have the common enemy, all the prior fractiousness comes out. I mean, if you ask the average person, how many Muslims have been killed by Americans and Israelis in the past 10 years versus how many Muslims have been killed by Muslims? Okay, so I think probably 98% of the Muslims that have been murdered in the past 10 years have been murdered by Muslims. So Muslims are their own worst enemy. They are the most bloodthirsty against each other. Go back 20 years in the Iran-Iraq war. Now, do they want to admit that their culture is so fractious, so bloodthirsty, so demented, that they blow each other up constantly, Shiites versus Sunnis, and then Iran versus Iraq, and what's happening in Pakistan. So if I were a reform-oriented Muslim, which I hope I would be if I were a Muslim, I'd be terribly sad right now. So how do you get over this shame? right? You have to find another enemy so that we can all forget about how profoundly destructive our culture is. So I think Israel is a convenient way to ignore their own problem. And by the way, from a psychological and psychological perspective, this is exactly what people do. When people do not want to deal with what's happening within, they try to blame it something else. That's our Torah portion today. I mean, the Torah portion today is about, I can't deal with my own feelings, therefore I'll project them onto the outside world. Okay? That's what we do all the time. And the projection is onto Israel and the United States. I get it, but that's why as an interlocutor, you have to say one thing. Wait, do you understand that Hamas declared war on Israel? Is that clear to you? Is that clear to you? Because they say, well, I don't know, say, wait a minute. We can't talk about the sewer system. I'm happy to, this is what I say to people. I'm happy to talk about the sewer system. But there's 3 steps before that. Do you know that Hamas has declared war on Israel and is committed to the destruction of the Jewish state? Do you know that? Oh, yes. Do you know that Iran funnels weapons into Hamas, including rockets, with greater and greater ranges, and Hamas can hit Beersheba and can hit Ashdod? Do you know that? Yes. So there's a war going on. Yes. So, and you understand that because Hamas is in charge, no one can determine where construction materials go. We could funnel all the construction materials we want into Gaza, and it would go to be building weapons and bunkers. What oversight do we have? Well, we have no oversight. Would Hamas have an interest in making sure the sewage system stays unrepaired to gain world sympathy? Well, yes. Right? So you start adding it all up. You say, yeah, I feel personally, Mordechai Finley, I feel terrible for the Palestinians. But the problem is Hamas, not Israel. Because Hamas said, we no longer declare war against Israel. We will have monitors on all of our borders, make sure no weapons get in, bring everybody you want in. Gaza would be rebuilt in 2 months. In 2 months, the sewers, the schools, everything would be rebuilt. The only reason it isn't rebuilt is Hamas, number one, I think, is manipulating Palestinian suffering, which is something they've been doing for 60 years. That's number one. And I think because, so Hamas is cynically exploiting it. And secondly, Israel has a right of self-defense, which says, if you can guarantee me 100% that this concrete is not going to go down to build command bunkers 30 feet under the ground, fine. You can't guarantee me that, we're not sending it in. Right? Now, we all have a right to self-defense. Yeah, so I understand your friends. People don't want to hear complexity. They just feel sorry for people. And again, I think this is the primary motivation of many well-intended people. They say, I have compassion, I feel sorry, I don't want to think rationally. It's just too hard. So that's what we're up against. We're up against people who are filled with compassion, but not with rationality. And it's a very dangerous mix.